Deployments. Packing up and heading out. But the way you deploy in the Air Force is evolving.
We've become accustomed to just-in-time training and with gear and equipment issued at the point of need to fall in on an unfamiliar team.
We look at other services and the way that the other services present forces to the combatant commanders. The Air Force traditionally has not had the ability to do that.
The way the Air Force presents forces currently fits in a paradigm that no longer exists in our strategic environment.
And this has got to change, and that's why we need to shift to AFFORGEN.
So the reason for the cycle change is really to get away from what we were doing in Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, where we had that constant mission set, and now trying to get after what's going to be required of our force in the future for that high-end fight.
The way you deploy under the new AFFORGEN concept, or Air Force Force Generation, is very different from the past. AFFORGEN is called a Force Generation model. The Department of Defense has 11 combatant commands responsible for specific regions like Africa and the Indo-Pacific, or functions like cyber and transportation. When those combatant commanders need additional troops or capabilities, each branch of the armed forces can provide units to meet the need. The armed forces are geared for 6 essential functions. 4 focus on forces or personnel. They include sizing the force, deploying the force, employing the force, and managing force rotations. Other functions are to sustain operational effects and to articulate the service's purpose. The Air Force includes all 6 elements when it talks about force presentation, literally the forces that'll be presented to a combatant commander when there's a need. Until now, Air Force deployments have been geared for an era of counterinsurgency and fighting terror. But the nature of conflict has shifted to great power competition. The Air Force is now focused on effective deterrence and the ability to win in conflict if deterrence fails.
We have organized ourselves toward threats that have evolved now, and our ability to meet those current and future threats requires a different structure for the Air Force and a different warfighting construct. And so our ability to adapt to the new strategic environment is really the impetus for change and why it's so important to change.
Lieutenant General Adrian Spain is the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the Pentagon. He's leading policy development and implementation for force management and readiness.
Readiness reflects a certain set of tasks that the Air Force is responsible for executing. It is the equivalent of being prepared to be a part of a team and knowing your role and knowing your function. On the flip side, not being ready and not being able to execute your role as a part of a team equates to not having real readiness in terms of joint force capabilities and what the Air Force needs to do to present forces.
And that's where AFFORGEN comes in.
Well, AFFORGEN gives us an ability to articulate capability, capacity, and risk for ourselves and to the joint force. It gives us an opportunity to prepare our forces in a way that ensures a coherent structure, a coherent team, and a trained and ready force for whatever task may come its direction, and present that to the joint force in a way that makes sense and is definable and defensible.
The commander of the 621st Contingency Response Wing, Colonel Jason Herring, is serious about getting his folks ready to deploy. He joins them for ruck marches during readiness training, and that's where we caught up with him.
So that's come in extremely useful here over the last several months as we started this process to really allow us to not only get after the equipment and the capability, but to set the force going forward for what we may be needed for in the future. And we can allow them to really train on major exercises for not only the joint level, but also with our joint partners, and being able to prepare, then certify that force, and then be able to get out and have them ready to commit.
He's talking about the 4 phases of AFFORGEN: prepare, certify, commit, and reset. For active duty, it's a 2-year cycle, with each cycle lasting 6 months. The idea is to prepare an entire unit for deployment instead of individuals who join up with a team chosen from scattered units. Forces assigned to INDOPACOM under PACAF or EUCOM USAFE are always available to meet combatant commander requirements, and so they don't necessarily get a reset phase after any sort of long duration in-theater or out-of-theater tasking. The major command commander can recommend which forces to use for a particular need based on readiness levels, but the combatant commander makes the call.
So in that AFFORGEN cycle, they will know who they're deploying with. It might be a whole unit, might be portion or a large portion of a unit that they are already a part of, but also through the training and the prepare and certify cycle, they are going to have the opportunity to work with maybe units from other bases, somewhat regionally, that can then be packaged to go downrange.
Doing team building exercises like this really helps you get closer to the team you're working with. I think the people you deploy with really make or break it. Basically, we're fishing out with the 6.21 mile ruck. Kind of make sure everybody's good. Hold on.
So I think through that cycle, what they're going to find is they're going to be much more comfortable deploying simply because they've trained together, they know the people they're working with, and they're going to have a little bit more awareness of what the mission is going to be once they get downrange.
The journey that we've been on is about warfighting effectiveness. It's about airmen as individuals being ready. It's about small teams of airmen being ready to go out as the small team, and is about building to larger teams and having a coherent fighting force that is effective in its warfighting mission. And valuing each one of those steps along the way, valuing the airmen, valuing the team, and valuing the warfighting mission that they have to execute and preparing them in a way that allows them to do that effectively.